You're listening to the Transcendent Farmer podcast with Emily Reno, created to inspire and empower the next generation of land stewards. All right, I'm super excited to have you join me today, Eric, and talk a little bit more about some of your experiences sort of in the farming space and sort of what you've learned, but just sort of some context and background for our audience. So Eric Sannerud, he is the National Co-op Organizing Lead for Farm Generations Cooperative, the farmer-owned cooperative online marketplace. Eric currently serves on various state and community organization boards and is a TEDx speaker. His TED Talk, Without Farmers, You'd Be Hungry, Naked, and Sober, has over 2 million views. And he currently farms outside of Malacca, Minnesota, with his wife and many, many animals. And as he says on his LinkedIn profile, I care a lot about farmers and hops. So welcome, Eric.
Hi, Emily. Happy to be here.
So I figured it would be great to kick things off, just kind of debriefing a little bit about a call that we were both on that we zoomed into yesterday, took place in the Twin Cities. And I just thought it would be kind of cool to talk a little bit about what your takeaways were from that. I can provide some context for our listeners on what that was. And it was just kind of timely and serendipitous that we both happened to be on that and then, had this conversation today. So for some context, basically, there has been a sustainable ag coalition called Mini Ag, and they have formed kind of a partnership of different nonprofit organizations or university partners, folks from all across the state, really, as a way of advocating for sustainable agriculture legislation and thinking about how do we equip people and get them sort of primed and ready for the opportunity to be able to advocate for certain policies or maybe changing existing ones to be able to support smaller scale growers and sort of the specific needs that they have as opposed to some of the bigger ag producers in the state. And what they had found sort of over time was that they needed to form working groups or just subgroups because there's so many things that can be worked on, but really having a concrete focus of a conversation could be helpful. And so if I recall correctly, this one was focused on, there were kind of like two subgroups even within that. There was a conversation that was focused more on the sort of food shelf area and sort of that system, and then how to better connect that to this whole process. And then it was sort of looking at from the producer perspective as well, how are they connected to food shelves and how are people getting access to food? And it was a really dynamic conversation. In my opinion, I thought there's a lot of rich information that was being shared. They kind of started out looking at some mapping and sort of expressing what are people's primary desires for being in the conversation, who are they affiliated with, and what are they advocating for. And, I'd just be interested to know, Eric, what were your thoughts, or maybe if you want to answer that question, like why were you there? What were you hoping to get out of the conversation? And what do you feel like you took away from it, or maybe that was missing from the conversation that you would have appreciated?
Yeah, I really like this group, and that I think some sort of coordination like this is incredibly necessary, and I'm really thankful to the organizers for putting all this together. I don't think there's anything like, I'm not surprised by the focus or the content of the conversation. I mean, conversations are defined by the people who are a part of them. And one of the things that I think is a challenge for groups like this, for SustAggy, policy orgs, honestly, any organization working to, with an agenda in agriculture, the farther you get from farmer leadership, I think or at least farmer engagement, I think that the more hollow your solutions or ideas become. Farmers, we can't be the policy leaders. We can't be the CEOs of every company, and then also farm full time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to juggle farming plus kind of anything else because farming asks you to be, your own policy leader on your own farm, understanding your own interactions with policy in and of itself. But I think yesterday's meeting of this group in particular really did kind of show um, wildly oversimplifying everything. But I have a very hard time understanding how, as a country, both federal and state governments just like pour money all over, technical assistant groups, um, nonprofit organizations, but like the difficulty for a small farm to get like 2 grand to get the kind of season extension, to increase their irrigation potential, to get like a tractor that works for their scale is just like hard. Like, why is that
Mm-hmm.
hard? We drop hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for staff to help farmers figure out what kind of tractor they need, or why a tractor might be a good part of their business model, or how investing in perennial crops could improve the like viability of their farm long term while helping the environment and blah 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 blah. But like, where's the money to just
Mm-hmm.
do that? We know what
Mm-hmm.
solutions are. We don't need, I don't. So that gets me a little grumpy sometimes,
No,
Emily.
I think you make such a good point. And I remember I heard this from a farmer that I started working for out here in the West Central region of Minnesota, a really similar conversation about how much money is being invested in the people that are sort of, 5, 6 levels up, maybe in like university systems, for example, that, they have a fixed salary and they're being paid all these things in order to help farmers. When really it's like, wow, what would happen if you actually just invested that directly in the farmer? And yeah, it seems like some of those systems they're kind of, yeah, they're far removed from where they could have a more direct impact in a much faster way. And I think that was something that came up too in the conversation, was this idea about sort of the bureaucratic sort of elements of all of this, and how there's so many different things that you have to go through in order to get access to the money. And I think sort of at a high level, what I have visualized very shortly after I moved to Minnesota about 4 years ago was sort of this idea of an arc, and you're thinking about sort of almost like the user experience of a farmer. Like if you're trying to go from point A to point B, who are all of the people that you are likely to interact with along that trajectory and path of, having your business, your farm business be functional, you're, earning revenue, that kind of thing. And I think that at the moment, it's just so scattered and diffuse. The energies are being invested in all of these different projects, but these systems aren't necessarily talking to each other. And so that's one of the things that I think has
Mm-hmm.
has brought me into sort of the planning space, is thinking about how can we make those systems more integrated and seamless from the user perspective, even if it's maybe slightly more
Right.
complicated from the professional technical assistance
Yes.
side.
Yes.
Like, how can we make it super, super easy that with a push of a button, like you get paired with, maybe a person that helps you
Yep.
navigate all of those things. Um,
And I think we should like, you know, we should acknowledge that it's not that there's like a bigger, like, we're fighting over crumbs, right?
mhm,
And we're not even fighting. What we're grumbling about here, right? We're grumbling that, from our perspective, we go to these meetings where we see people who are making like at least relatively decent, like better than minimum wage probably salaries, with like farmers who are like, I didn't harvest my crop this year because I didn't have $1,000.
mhm,
Um, and it's like, okay, that's a disparity. Um,
mhm,
but I think it's also important that we like acknowledge that like we're not here like technical assistant providers or nonprofit folks or university staff or all these people who are trying to support farmers, like, to feel guilty about earning a salary,
right, right,
which
not
is
at all.
probably not even fair for the amount of value they create, but that we're all in this together, and like
Mhm,
it's a bigger structural issue why, like, ultimately at the end of the day, farmers in this country, whether it's my neighbor with the soybeans or the big chicken barn, or anyone growing a half acre of vegetables to feed their community, like, none of those folks are getting a fair deal,
mhm,
as far as being paid for the value of the labor or the products that they produce in this country.
mhm.
And so, like, I want to make sure anyone who's maybe listening, I mean, how many farmers or farm included, my wife and I farm, the bulk of our income is not from the flowers that we grow and sell. It's from my non-farming day job, right? You know,
Yes. Yeah.
that's the same story for my neighbor who does the chicken barn, and the neighbor who does the, like, they got spouses, they got partners, they got other people in their lives who are providing the health insurance for their family. They got other people in their lives for providing the stable sort of income. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think it's just important that we don't, in all of this conversation, that we don't like. I'm really big for some level of solidarity with other people who are not billionaires. So
Well, I think that provides a good segue to sort of kind of stepping back a little bit. I would be really interested in hearing a little bit more about sort of your experience in farming and how you got into that. I know that you've got experience within the brewery industry, especially because a lot of the folks that are listening to this are, farmers or future farmers are trying to get into that space, and maybe they're trying to understand the dynamics around that market in particular.
yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start with the brewing stuff. There's a lot there. My but so I guess my farming story is like a little bit. I farmed hops for beer for 7 or 8 years, and got into farming with a small CSA vegetable farm, and then started with hops and kind of grew that to be a farm that was earning me a living, and paying our employees well and all this stuff. Um, but the tricky one to work with. It's an industry that's built around like very stable commodity supply of all of their ingredients. Um, and it can be tricky for a smaller farm to come in. Brewers are kind of increasingly price sensitive. Um, and I think the real trick and the positive aspect here is if you can find a brewer or a handful of brewers or a brewing community that really values local and and that's a part of their ethos. There are stories and there are breweries out here who are doing incredible things, have an incredible commitment. Paying two, three, 4 times the cost that they could get for the same ingredient to support local because they believe in the flavor and the relationship and the value, um, and the kind of the morals of selling local beer with local ingredients. And
Mhm.
that's the ticket to succeed, outside of all the farming stuff. But you also have to have the right market and the right commitment from the brewing community in your area to make it
Mhm.
work.
Do you know, because this is kind of a new sort of area for me. I'm not too familiar with it, but do you find that there tends to be more almost like aggregation of grains within the brewery industry just because of what you're saying? Like for a smaller scale operation, it's harder just because of the quantity that is required.
I think there's a number of like craft malt farms in the country,
Mm-hmm.
and craft maltsters. Um, and I think in general all the maltsters contract from multiple farms. There are some like farm maltsters where it's all their own stuff or primarily their own stuff. Um, I'm not as familiar with the malt side. I'm a hop guy. I think you read my I care a lot about farmers and hops. It did not say malt or barley or wheat or so I'm sure there are examples of like a larger malter who sources from a number of different farms, and there's
Mm-hmm.
examples of farms who are kind of single source with the and then do their own malting. Um, Malt, I would say, is maybe an easier way into the market, hops, just because if you're already set up to do small grains, it's a relatively small investment compared to hops. It can be tricky to grow malting grade barley. It can be tricky to either malting it yourself can get expensive, or finding someone to buy it from you for malting, or et cetera, et cetera. But it's an annual crop with equipment that hopefully you already have. Uh, Multiple ways. You have an enterprise plan that for multiple crops a year, and multiple different kind of market streams, and you're just going to try out malting barley or whatever, um, malting grape barley. Uh, you don't have to do all the incredible sacrifices and financial investments that hops ask of people who grow them.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is so special about hops in particular? I mean, it's just of all the people that I've interacted with in the farming space, I think you were the only person I know that got into sort of that side of the farming sphere. And it's like when I think about hops, I think about brewery culture and everything that's associated with that. But I don't know if that's the same for a farmer of hops, if that's part of the territory of like doing all of this, or like why were you drawn to hops in the first place?
Well, we were my co-founders and I were 21-ish and 22 maybe. Um, and really liked beer, and at least a few of us liked the idea of farming. Um, at least what we understood of it at the time. And hops just were what we knew because we had done kind of more horticulture things. Like I had done veggies. A co-founder has a horticulture degree from. So we weren't kind of in the mindset of small grain agriculture, right? We didn't know what a combine was, you
Mm,
know, but it was just what we knew. You know, if you're growing
mhm,
flowers or vegetables or gardening, hops are a lot closer to that than the type of agriculture that small grains do best in.
mhm. Yeah. So, for folks that are listening, maybe and they're interested in trying to get into this sort of sphere of the agricultural industry, what do you think are the most important things that they should have in mind, considering your experience in this space and maybe some of the lessons that you learned?
It's a really tricky space. You need brewers committed to supporting your product, whatever that might be. And what's tricky is before you have the product, everyone will say that they'll support it, and you can get them to sign things and commit in various ways. But ultimately, they're not going to buy something if it's not good. They're not going to buy something if they don't want it for whatever reason. You might never know why they don't want it. So it puts you in a really tricky position. I think to get into this industry, you have to take some amount of more risk than maybe other markets. Um, the brewing industry is full of people who really love it and full of people who have been willing. It's full of people who really love it, and so it makes it so that the industry can have these like barriers to entry that are like in some ways very not great, like you know brewing staff, front house staff, like overall pay in the industry is like very low. Um, it's for farmers trying to get into it, like you got to show it before someone will buy it, because we're talking about kind of like business to business sales here basically.
Mhm.
So you got to take all that risk to try to get that malting grade barley, and then maybe your specs are off, so no one likes it, or maybe the breweries in your area don't care that the specs are off, and they love the flavor, and now you're in, and now you're good,
Mm.
and you can grow with them. Um, it's just a really risky space, and the whole industry is kind of subsidized by people's willingness to sacrifice, income or take risks to be a part of a space that they really like, feel comfortable in, enjoy, you know, are passionate about.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about, what's the level of risk that you are willing to take. I think that's going to be probably one of the biggest themes of what I want to work with farmers on. It's sort of in my own courses too, and thinking about how do you design your business model in a way that provides for maybe the most risk possible and still feel so good about
Yeah.
where you're at financially. I think that that has been so much of my own story in trying to figure this thing out, right? And design things so strategically in a way that it's like no matter what happens on that farm field, I'm going to be fine financially. And I think that's a such a big concern of all future farmers right now is yeah, how do you balance that risk out? And how do you balance the, off farm income with the farm income in terms of hours in a day, right? And I think one of the conclusions that I'm coming to is like one, lean into passive income, and two, figure out how you can increase your hourly wage as much as possible so that you can work less hours in general from week to week. And then you're fine, that it's like you've got that buffer that's there and is really supporting you. And just getting yourself in a better headspace. Cause I think that's a really big thing that farmers deal with is just like, where's the money going to come from, and yeah, so I really
Hmm.
appreciate that. So right now, you've kind of taken a step away from sort of the brewery industry, the hops area, at least from what I understand. And now you're with Farm Generations Cooperative. And I know one of the things that is sort of a part of that is program called GrownBy. So I think people would be really interested in knowing what is that? What is it all about? Who is it seeking to serve? And maybe how is it working to solve their problem?
Speaking of being paid well per hour, uh, I'm still involved with Hops and Beer and as a consultant, and so there you go.
There you go. There you go,
more than
listeners.
uh more than I would have made farming the stuff. Okay. But my day job that I love is with Farm Generations Cooperative. Um, we're we're the farmer owned cooperative marketplace. We're America's first farmer owned online e-commerce platform. We're really proud of all that. Platform is called GrownBy. So we're a farm generations cooperative, is owned by farmers. One member, one vote, traditional co-op for anyone out there who's aware of kind of differences between co-op governance structures. We're the true blue kind. And the first product that Farm Generations Cooperative has developed is GrownBy, which is an online e-commerce platform where farmers can sell to consumers and consumers can shop from multiple farms. It's not just a shop for your farm, it's a marketplace. It's kind of like an online farmers market where someone can go on and shop from any farm that's on the site.
And how would you maybe distinguish this from some of the other online sort of e-commerce platforms that are out there? Because I'm thinking about, who the competitors might be in this space. And I'm wondering, like, is local line, is that in this space as well? Or like, how would you distinguish Grown By from maybe some of the other things that are out there?
Yeah, there's a ton of them out there. Um, there's this idea in tech and on the coasts um, that like we can use tech to like solve various problems with for the food system, and then like specifically when they start thinking about problems that small farmers face, it always comes down to like online sales, like coordinated delivery, blah 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 blah. And the thing that I think that none of those have really broken through is they've correctly identified a challenge that small and direct to consumer farmers face, which is reaching consumers. Um, uh, and but then they don't apply the tool in the right way. They
Mm,
apply the tool with the mindset of like venture of 30% annual returns, of hockey stick explosive growth, sell out the app to Google someday, whatever. Um,
mhm,
an of profit motive, basically. Like if you imagine profit motive, the dial that goes from 0 to 10, like VC and venture capital and kind of tech startup landia is like at an 11. Um, and that derails derails things relatively quickly. But I think so.
mhm,
So we're a cooperative. We're owned by our farmers who use our service. Our service is designed by them, built for them, and owned by them. The profits that the co-op may eventually realize will be redistributed based on how they decide to do that, based on who they vote for to be on our board of directors, who then decides what to do with financial decisions like that. Um, the level of the amount of profit motive here is that whatever kind of a healthier number, like maybe 5. Um, we don't need to make enough to make some rich person richer. We need to make enough to adequately, substantially serve our farmers and meet their needs.
mhm.
That's an incredibly different number.
Yeah.
But what we need enough to pay to do good work to serve our members. There's no
Mhm,
external driving exploitive extractive revenue drive here.
mhm. And would you say
That's something
that
that to me is an enormous difference. An enormous difference. But it from a practical, everyday useful, like how useful is the tool, you know, a profit motivated, a very, very profit motivated company can be just as good at developing software as I think we're closer to our farms because they have actual equity in their entity. They're not just our customers, they are functionally my boss's boss, right?
Mhm,
Um, but I think there's other things, our platform is unique in that it is this marketplace. It's not just like Shopify. Um, is just making a shop for you, right? You put a little link on your site, or you build your site on Shopify, or Space, or whatever. Um, we're a marketplace, and that's another very intentional choice. Um, there's all these conversations, including that one we referenced yesterday, Emily, about like the share of the uh, Americans buying of local food, and how do we do this? And sh- shopping for groceries online is the way that we do that. It's an enormous growth opportunity for local food in general to reach more consumers by meeting them where they are. Something like 95% of Generation Z in this study um, only shop for groceries online, like exclusively.
Mm.
And like something like 50 to 70% of millennials. Um, so if we're like, how are we going to keep growing local food? Because we want to do that. We know local food is good. We need to adapt away from a farmer's market or a CSA as like the main ways that you engage with it, right? Because let's think about it. I mean, farmers, Emily, you'll be talking to farmers. Like, how do you value your time at market? Like, every market day takes the whole day from you. You got to go and set up, or you got to pay someone to be there and set up. You got to hire someone who's good enough to like represent all these things. There's a lot of challenges with being at markets. You have to earn a pretty good amount of money to justify any given market stand. But what if you could sell all that stuff, somewhat passively, to use your language earlier, of like
Hmm.
you have a shop online and your customers go there and buy things, and then you download your order sheet and then you fill those orders like any other business, basically.
Hmm.
Makes the ordering and sales less labor intensive for you. So I think that marketplace aspect is a big thing that makes us different and is a big part of our long-term impact goal, which right now we're incredibly focused on developing the best platform and product that we can in GrownBy to attract farmers to the platform and to ask them to join our co-op. But there is going to be a time, and we're nearing that time in some locations across the country, where we have a um, kind of a critical mass of farmers on the site where if a shopper, oh, I can buy my bread locally and my eggs and my cheese products and my raw milk, and I can get my vegetables covered and my everything that, you can get a full diet locally on GrownBy. We're getting there in a couple of different markets. And when we hit
Hmm.
that point, then we kind of switch over to marketing to shoppers. Our dream is that we're a space where thousands of farmers own a slice of a significant player in the online retail game for local food. And the power of that, of course, is more local food, more accessible because people can purchase it whenever they want on the app or online, just as easy it is to shop from Amazon or wherever else, where people can easily use EBT and SNAP online, where people can shop around and purchase whatever they need from local farms in one spot without having to like know, oh, I'm looking for seed garlic and like posting on Facebook or whatever and like hoping that you get a
Hmm.
hit on a good place. You can just do that yourself. I mean, these are barriers that, those of us who are like hyped and like bought and sold on local already, right? Don't see because we're not new to it. If you think about it from the point of view, someone's used to buying like delivery from Whole Foods, and then you ask them to like go to a farmer's market where the thing that they want may or may not be there. Um, what all these other things that are kind of inconvenient about local food. If we could just make it more convenient. So anyway, our dream is big, like that. And then importantly, I believe that it's a guarantee that online grocery shopping is going to become is an increasing amount of the pie of how Americans shop for groceries. I think that's undeniable.
Hmm.
Um, it's very clear to me not only because the data shows it increasing and the generational kind of survey data shows that, but look at where all the money's going. Like these real rich people who have amounts of wealth that is immoral, and that in a sane society would be treated as such. Um, they're investing their money in online grocery sales and delivery methods and all these things. And we're never going to beat Jeff Bezos at his game. Um, the system doesn't work like that. But local food needs to have a space at the table, and it's our belief that that space at the table should be owned by the farmers. Because otherwise, at the end of the day, it might just be replicating Bezos bucks. Like it might be replicating um, if it's just Whole Foods selling local food online to consumers, it's not as good as it could be as a farmer-owned market channel selling things online to consumers, because the profits aren't going to be being extracted to make Jeff richer. The profits would be returned to the farmers to make them wealthier, to help them earn a living, respectable, amount of income that matches the value that they're creating for society.
Mhm.
So that was a long rant, Emily. I could go on about this forever. I really get worked up about that.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I think that the farmers listening also really appreciate that. I bet one of the questions that's coming to their mind is, at what point or maybe at what scale does using this platform make economic sense for them? So, like, within your target market, for example,
Sure.
how would you know that they're a good fit to be using this platform to sell their products?
So GrownBy, uh, I mean, I'm proud of this group and this organization, this co-op. We're free to use. We're free to sign up. There's no startup fees. There's no subscription service. There's no paywalls. There's no premium features. All these pricing models that are problematic and normed in tech spaces. Every company wants a subscription business model because, in part, it makes it hard for you to leave as a customer, or
Mhm.
they have a high startup cost to make you have some cost fallacy. Um, and these are very common tactics that, depending on how you look at it, could also perhaps be considered immoral, depending on how they're implemented, especially. We don't have any of that. We just have a transaction fee. So the credit card company takes a percentage. The co-op charges a 2% service fee for providing the platform, and that's it.
Okay.
So it's very simple. And so, from a point of view of what scale does it work for you, um, it can scale all over the place. We have farms who use it like exclusively for, um, like one crop a season. Maybe it's their pumpkin crop that they sell at the end of the driveway, right? But
Mhm.
we have farms who use it for 1,000-person CSAs, incredibly complex, scaled farm business.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year of revenue, farm businesses. Um, so it's incredibly scalable. And out from like a generic perspective, deciding to sell online is a choice that should be part of your, if you're thinking about farming or you're thinking about your next season, it should be a very intentional choice. Um, you should shop around. I mean, this is just more unpaid work you have to do. Look around at the landscape, see which ones have, features that you like, set up, conversations. I'll speak for ourselves. Like, we will, one, our customer service is always free. We will talk with you about GrownBy 17 times if that's what you want. We'll help you sign up. We'll help you build your store. We'll sit there on the video call with you and like click through building your store with you. You just tell us what you want. Um, we are very farmer oriented over here. Um, so I think, just in general, like, I would really encourage folks to build in online sales to their conception of their marketing channels for their farm. I think that it's going to be an increasingly important space. I think there's a lot of potential reward for finding a good way to do that for your farm.
Most definitely. Yeah. And I think, if I come across something too, there's just so much research out there that's showing about those consumer trends. Might throw those in the show notes for this, just for folks to take a look at, because it is expanding. And a lot of that happened because of the pandemic, right? For safety purposes. And when people found that it was just more convenient
Yeah.
to be shopping that way, it became a norm. And so I agree. I completely agree. I think farmers need to get on this boat and stay there. And start to take
Yeah.
up a larger percentage of the market share within that space, because we only have, things to, gain from that. Both the farmers and the consumers, right? Filling their bodies with more
Hmm.
nutritious foods. It's just a win-win, I think. So yeah, that's really
Well, if
exciting.
we're going to do that, if we're going to be building this new space, we should not be building it with the same exploitive business practices as the past. We don't need more private, hyper profit motivated, you know, entities trying to suck money out of farmers. Like, no, stop.
Hmm.
Why? We know what happens
Yeah.
over and over and over again. We know the model. Farmers are too expensive. or capitalism at its maximum profit motive. Like that's the story of American agriculture. And for small farmers, we're here because we don't want to be a part of that. We see the various externalities in that. So let's build our own systems. Let's own our own systems to protect ourselves and show that a different way is possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a theme that I've been seeing in a lot of like courses that I've taken, even whether it's related to business development or some of the other podcasts that I've listened to. There's just this sort of through line I'm seeing in and even like in the sort of a space of spirituality and like personal growth and development. There, like a lot of people talk about, the shift that's happening in human consciousness and like all of these things that have happened because of the pandemic and sort of people just like waking up and seeing like, wow, these systems weren't actually working for us, and how this is actually lifting up a whole new set of entrepreneurs that are building their businesses in a way that is really prioritizing, wellness and doing business differently, exactly like what you're saying, building the systems that weren't there previously to support people, their customers, the planet in a much more intentional way. And so it's really exciting to see that happening. And I feel like, this cooperative is one of those examples of what does that look like when it's actually done in practice. So that's really exciting. And I think it's also a good segue into my next sort of question, which is related more to that sort of, spiritual side, personal growth and development, because that's something I think that listeners are also very much interested in. I would be curious to know, as you were working in hops farming, and also even today, I know that your wife is currently farming. What are the things that got you through the toughest times of running your business? Whether that was, a personal habit or practice that you had that was daily, anything that really supported your mental health. What did that look like, or what does that look like today?
It was not good when I was farming for my living. It was not good. I didn't do a good job of um, taking care of that part of myself. Things that helped were journaling, um, but I did a bad job. I think I was so wildly anxious and unhappy um, for various reasons throughout the majority of the time that I was farming for a living
Mm-hmm.
that uh, I wasn't happy um, the majority of those days. I was way too stressed out. And I didn't have a good way of coping with that.
Mm.
I did a very bad job of coping with that. Um, I don't have any tips or tricks, but to but maybe I was in too deep and staking all my financial security on farming wasn't the right choice for me right away, right? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe I just took too much of a risk for me to be able to handle and be happy with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so maybe it's more to what you were saying earlier, like trying to plan. Because for me, when the financial kind of stability isn't at risk, then it's a lot easier to take things day by day, to expect and understand that there's a significant amount of things on the farm that are out of your control.
Yeah.
Um, to try to understand when the effort isn't worth the outcome, and try to think smarter versus working harder. Um, um, those are things when I'm, now that I'm not desperately financially tied to farming, that I can appreciate more than when I was in it too deep.
Mm-hmm. What about, I mean, so you're now the, partner of a farmer too.
Yeah.
Like, what is that dynamic like? How do you maybe show up for your partner in that relationship? Because I imagine there's probably people that are listening that are in a similar situation. Maybe they aren't the one that's doing the farming full time, but their partner is. What does that look like?
I mean, we're figuring that out. I'm figuring that out. I know that there are a lot of ways that I could be a better partner to my farming partner, but I think when I'm doing my best, it's, you know, just the basic relationship stuff, um, specifically to farm, it's like, we have a farm, and there's the flower farm aspect of it, and there's all the other farm aspects of it. Um, and kind of, I think when I engage with her around what are the top priority things for the flower farm, um, and I'm able to be supportive there, that goes a long way. While still trying to balance the rest of the farm. Um, it helps that I used to farm. I think that helps
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like I have some perspective or past shared experience, but I also don't know if it actually helps because I've like having been there before. I'm like, man, I just wish that I wasn't so stressed as often when I was farming. I would have been a lot
Mm.
happier and
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed the ride more. And
Yes.
I think when you're in the middle of it, hearing someone who like is not in the middle of it be like, just chill. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
are we gonna do about it anyway? It'll all be fine. Is not
Mm-hmm.
always the most uh supportive thing to hear.
Yeah,
So sometimes I wonder if my past farming experience, I'm probably not utilizing it to its fullest extent to support Rachel and her farm.
sure. I think that's such a good point though, because I mean, even with my experiences last year, I was doing my own operation with fresh cut flowers and herbs for the farmers market. And yeah, you're right. When you're in it, it's brutal. It's so bad. And then, just this would have been maybe about a month ago, I was asked to do a short, just make some flower arrangements for the Virgus fashion show, right? And
Yeah.
I just forgot how much I loved spending my Friday mornings picking flowers, making arrangements, and how meditative that process was, and how intense my work had become through my day job, and how I felt like I didn't have that balance anymore between, getting out away from a screen, and just being in nature and allowing, myself to enjoy the silence that comes with that. I think that we so often
Yeah.
are just like filling our heads and our minds with content and information. And I think that I found that farming for me really gives me that balance of processing, right? All the information that I'm taking in, or allowing myself to reflect on that. And yeah, I agree. I think that it's really important for people to be set up for success when it comes to like managing that stress. And I think that's something I really hope to focus on with farmers as part of my courses too, is what does that look like for people on a day-to-day basis? And how do you become comfortable with uncertainty? Because ultimately, I think that if you can master that as a farmer, you are golden.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, exactly. Like you have to be able to do that, and part of that might be, not taking the biggest financial risk because you can't screw around with the idea of like paying your bills to farm. So if your farm,
Mhm.
the relative success or not of your farm, like if you're paying your bills relies on there not being a hailstorm, um, you're going to be really anxious about there being a hailstorm because probably should be. But if, you know, your farm is scaled to the point or your financial picture is such a way that if there's a hailstorm, you wake up the next morning and figure out what's left and go from there. But you still have a roof over your head, or your basic needs are met, or the people you're taking care of are taken care of. Then I think you're in a good spot. Because yeah, that is ultimately at the end of the day, like farming is about time and temp, things from one place to another, or like shepherding energy around, and it's about not having the level of control that it's easier to pretend we have in other ways of living.
Mhm. Yeah. So for people that are interested in learning more about sort of the GrownBy platform, or maybe if folks wanted to reach out to you directly to be able to get more information about that, where should they go for more information?
I think the best place to start is farmgenerations.coop. That's our site. Got all sort where we have an Instagram, or people can reach out to me. My email and contact information is on the website. So
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time, Eric. I'm so grateful for the work that you are doing in Minnesota and beyond. I think that the farming space is richer because of the work that you are doing. And I just appreciate how much that in the short time that we've known each other, I just feel like we've connected very easily around, the things that we're passionate about.
Yeah.
And I just think that your leadership is really, really inspiring. So thank you. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Transcendent Farmer podcast. If you love this conversation as much as we did, feel free to share the love by passing it along to a friend or fellow farmer, and be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss another episode. Until next time, friends.